Stop trying to fix everyone. A Zen lesson on letting go. Right now, a sharp, dry heat or prickling sensation is localized across the outer edges of your shoulder blades and extending up to the base of your skull, creating the distinct physical feeling of a literal shelf bearing an unyielding, invisible weight. It is the deep, systemic exhaustion of the chronic fixer, the somatic toll of spending your days gathering up the broken pieces of other people's plans, patching together their collapsing emotions, and frantically trying to repair structural failures that you did not cause. You are staring into the dark tonight because your mind is trapped in a relentless cycle of panic, convinced that if you dare to step down from the roof or stop managing the crises of those around you, everything they have built will instantly come crashing down to the earth. In this quiet space, the immediate environment is establishing an entirely fresh, unmonitored sanctuary of complete privacy. The room around you is heavy with the scent of cool, dry cedar oil and the dim, stabilizing texture of dark, unpolished floorboards that absorb the ambient shadows. Outside your walls, a cold mountain wind is sweeping across the valley, rattling the distant pine trees but leaving the deep, dense air within your room completely undisturbed. The smooth, flat surface beneath your spine requires no balancing acts from your muscles tonight. It does not demand that you shore up a single relationship or act as the load-bearing pillar for anyone else's survival before the sun rises. There is no collapse to prevent in this dark, no emergency text to intercept, and no structural failure to patch over before the morning comes. You are not broken, dear friend. What you are feeling right now is not a sign of personal failure, nor is it proof that you are uniquely weak, incompetent, or incapable of holding life together. The profound weariness you carry is simply the natural consequence of a human body that has been forced to act as an unyielding roof for a storm it was never meant to shelter. Tonight, we will not force your mind to be silent, nor will we demand that you banish these protective worries from your thoughts. We will not treat your habit of fixing as a character flaw that must be violently corrected, or your boundary fatigue as an enemy that must be punished in the dark. Instead, we are going to change the way your awareness holds this crushing sense of responsibility, learning how to let the heavy, cracked tiles slide away from your spirit so that the vastness of the sky can finally show through. There is an ancient, surprising insight within the Zen lineage that addresses this exact state of exhaustion. The collapse you are running yourself ragged to prevent has already occurred, and your desperate attempt to patch the leaks is the very thing that is splintering your remaining strength. We overthink our boundaries because fear convinces us that our constant intervention is the only thing keeping the world from falling apart. But this frantic, internal repairs manual is not a shield, it is a heavy burden that bends the rafters until they break under the strain. Peace is found not by successfully repairing every cracked life around you tonight, but by recognizing that you are safe enough to soften the prickling heat across your skull, allowing the open spaces of your life to exist without a protective ceiling. Maybe you have felt this too, during those heavy midnight hours when another person's chaos feels like an immediate demand on your own physical nervous system, an emergency that pulls your shoulders into a permanent shrug of defensive readiness. If it feels right, take a slow breath into the absolute baseline of your abdomen, noticing the unhurried, flat drop of your chest as the air naturally recedes without any help from your thoughts. You do not need to force anything into a state of structural perfection right now, and absolutely nothing is required of you before the daylight returns. The people you are trying to rescue, the collapsing plans, the messy emotions, the individuals who are refusing to clear their own debris, all of these things can exist exactly as they are without your active intervention tonight. When we constantly live as the caretakers of other people's failures, our minds begin to resemble an ancient clay-tiled roof built over a soft, decaying timber storage shed. The rafter lines beneath are already sponge-soft with age and rot, unable to support any further weight. Yet the anxious caretaker keeps climbing up the ladder rungs during every storm, stacking heavy, mismatched, cracked terracotta tiles directly over the leaks to force a seal. The caretaker is so consumed by the fear of water entering the room that they fail to realize a startling paradox. The water itself is not what will destroy the structure. It is the immense, cumulative weight of the mismatched patches stacked high on top of the soft cedar that eventually causes the entire frame to splinter and cave inward. The roof does not fail because the storm was too violent it crashes, because the fixer refused to leave an empty space where the sky could simply pass through the beams. Your mind, in its habit of constant psychological engineering and boundary exhaustion, has been climbing the ladder for years, trying to stack patch after patch over the collapsing dynamics of your environment. You look for safety, yet the internal weight only grows more punishing. Not because you lack compassion, but because you are treating your own energy as an infinite timber that can hold up the skies of everyone you meet. The suffering you feel tonight is the friction of that extra weight, the dry, prickling heat of a body that is desperately trying to act as a shield for things that are naturally meant to fall apart on their own unhurried timeline. Let yourself notice that old habit of structural panic without judging it as a mistake. The instinct to patch every leak when we see someone we care about struggling is merely a deeply ingrained form of love, a way the empathetic spirit tries to create order when the world feels unpredictable and dangerous. But tonight that love can take a much cooler, more spacious form. In a moment, our journey will take us up to a neglected mountain storage hut near a high cliff, where an old roofer and a simple wooden peg will show us how to let the heavy tiles slide away without any struggle at all for now. Let your awareness rest within the simple, flat reality of your physical frame, allowing the sharp heat across your shoulder blades to be exactly as it is, fully protected by the absolute privacy of the night. High on a jagged limestone ridge near a steep mountain cliff where winter gales regularly ripped away the valley vegetation, the cold air smelled intensely of sun-baked cedar bark, dry stone dust, and the sharp, clean scent of approaching rain. It was a desolate, wind-scored setting, where the only constant sound was the low, rhythmic groaning of old pine trunks bending under the force of the high-altitude currents. In this isolated workspace lived an aging roofer named Master Jochu, whose large knuckles were permanently bent and swollen from a lifetime of pressing heavy wet clay into place, and who spent almost all his daylight hours standing balanced on the narrow rungs of a cedar ladder. He moved with a heavy, deliberate slowness that made him seem like an extension of the cliff face, his breath even and unhurried despite the precarious drops beneath his heels. Working alongside him as an apprentice was a young traveler named Tokusan, who carried a localized burning ache that kept his shoulder blades pinned back in a rigid state of permanent alert, making the base of his skull feel hot and compressed. Tokusan had fled to the high ridge after his family's silk-weaving workshop in the lowlands had fallen into financial ruin, a disaster that had occurred because his late father had accumulated massive, hidden debts from gambling. For 3 years, Tokusan's mind had been trapped in a punishing loop of psychological management, constantly replaying the day the lowland bailiffs arrived, obsessing over how he could have monitored his father's movements more closely, and living with a biting terror that if he paused his exhausting vigilance for even a single day, the lives of his dependent younger sisters would completely collapse into poverty. This intense drive to prevent disaster had turned Tokusan into a frantic worker who treated every minor imperfection around him as an absolute emergency. He would look down at the valley villages, his thoughts spinning an elaborate web of protective strategies, believing that his constant internal calculations were the only thing keeping his fractured family from falling into the abyss. He lived with a quiet, biting shame that he had not been strong enough to shore up his father's character, and because of this boundary exhaustion, he took on the emotional weight of everyone he encountered, treating the minor mistakes of his fellow apprentices as a personal failure that he was obligated to repair before nightfall. At the very edge of the mountain camp stood a neglected storage hut, used for sheltering the temple's winter grain reserves. The main structural beam of this small building had grown soft and sponge-like from years of unmonitored dampness, its grain separating under the weight of the massive clay tiles that formed the roof. During an exceptionally dark afternoon, a sudden, violent summer squall began to move across the high cliff, sending heavy sheets of water driving against the cedar walls. Tokusan, looking up from his workbench, noticed that the center of the roofline was beginning to sag dangerously, water pouring through the expanding gaps between the terracotta tiles and threatening to ruin the grain below. Driven by an immediate surge of structural panic, Tokusen grabbed a bundle of heavy, mismatched replacement tiles that had been left under a tarp and scrambled up the slippery rungs of the cedar ladder. Clinging to the wet rafters with one hand, his pulse pounding against the sides of his throat, he began frantically stacking the heavy pieces of clay directly over the leaks, trying to force a seal through sheer velocity. He worked with a desperate, trembling intensity, jamming the new tiles over the cracks, believing that if he did not patch the roof completely before the storm reached its peak, the storage hut would fail, and he would be responsible for the monastery's winter starvation. As the wind howled across the limestone ridge, splitting the branches of the nearby dwarf pines, Master Jochu climbed up the ladder, his heavy wool vest soaked with rain. The old roofer did not shout at the apprentice to get down, nor did he offer a frantic hand to help move the terracotta blocks. Instead, he pulled himself onto the highest rafter line, reached into his tool pouch, and produced a single split bamboo rafter peg, a slender, weathered piece of wood used to wedge loose timbers into temporary alignment. Jochu did not use the peg to brace the sagging beam, he simply held it out between his swollen fingers, motionless in the driving rain. The old man did not look at Tokusen's terrified face. He kept his eyes fixed on the point where the main cedar support met the limestone wall. With a slow, unhurried gesture that seemed to defy the chaos of the storm, Jochu reached out and tapped the split bamboo peg against the side of the load-bearing timber. He did not drive it into the wood to shore up the sag, he merely used the slender peg as a pointer, showing how the weight of the replacement tiles Tokusen had just stacked was actually causing the soft cedar to grain split. A long, dark fissure opening down the center of the beam under the immense cumulative pressure of the patch. Jochu let the split bamboo peg slip from his fingers, watching it fall harmlessly through the open rafter lines to the dirt floor below. In his low, steady voice, which remained perfectly clear beneath the roaring mountain wind, the old roofer told the young man that when a main support has grown soft from its own history, a caretaker cannot cure the weakness by stacking more clay on top of the leaks. The extra tiles do not bring safety. They are the very things that are breaking the beam. He pointed down at the valley where the storm was moving harmlessly across the wide river flats, and explained that the hut did not fail because the rain was too heavy, but because the fixer refused to leave an empty space where the sky could pass through without any resistance. Standing on the high rafter line with the cold mountain wind biting into his wet neck, a sudden wave of emotional recognition washed through Tokusen's chest. The frantic internal repairs manual that had been running inside his head for 3 years instantly lost its grip, shattered by the simple sight of the splintering cedar support. He looked at the heavy, mismatched tiles he had been so desperately stacking, and he recognized the precise nature of his own exhaustion. The burning heat across his shoulder blades did not come from his family's lowland poverty, nor did it come from the violence of the storm. The suffering emerged entirely from his own habit of climbing up the ladder of every crisis he met, violently overloading his own nervous system with other people's structural failures because he was too terrified to let the roof remain open. The old master slowly descended the rungs, leaving the apprentice alone on the wet beam as the squall began to break, revealing a brilliant empty expanse of pale blue sky through the gaps in the wood. In a moment, this high mountain ridge will bring its cool wind closer to the specific psychological weights of your own evening. But for now, let that image of the sliding clay tiles rest within your thoughts, noticing how the deepest structural relief always arrives when we finally choose to step down from the ladder. This ancient glimpse up into the fracturing rafter lines of the mountain hut is not telling us to turn our backs on the people who depend on us, nor is it asking us to become cold, indifferent, or completely numb to the real hardships that our loved ones experience. It is not a suggestion that you should build a cynical, unyielding wall around your capacity for empathy, or look down at the lowlands of human chaos with a detached, superior sneer. Buddhist wisdom does not expect you to watch a family member or a close friend struggle and feel nothing but a blank emotional vacuum. Instead, it is revealing something much quieter, something far more deeply protective of your remaining strength. It is showing us that the primary source of our exhaustion is rarely the simple existence of other people's problems, but the frantic, desperate way the mind holds those problems, turning a natural downpour into a permanent internal executioner. When we look directly into this pattern, we can see how we continuously add a second wound to the first. The first wound is simply what life brings: a parent's financial misstep, a partner's emotional turbulence, the natural instability of a business, or the simple, unpreventable reality that the people we love are sometimes deeply flawed, short-sighted, and incapable of managing their own choices. This first pain is clean, a natural part of living a limited human life within an unpredictable and changing world. It is the natural softening of the cedar support beams when the moisture of many winters passes through the valley. But the second wound is the one we construct ourselves in the dark hours of the evening. It is the heavy, suffocating internal narrative that insists we must personally act as the unyielding shield against their consequences, that we are fundamentally failing if they are unhappy, and that we must violently load our own shoulder blades with their structural failures until our own health begins to splinter. This second wound is the bundle of heavy, mismatched terracotta tiles we carry up the ladder in a state of psychological panic, stacking patch after patch over a leak we did not cause because we are too terrified of what will happen if the floor gets wet. What we often describe as a deep sense of responsibility or dedication in our modern lives is frequently the tight, suffocating grip of an anxious ego that whispers, "If I do not manually control this situation, if I do not stay awake to engineer a perfect solution for their chaos, everything will crash to the earth and I will be to blame." We treat the ordinary imperfections of our environment as an absolute emergency that must be aggressively managed, a broken roofline that must be forced into alignment before we are permitted to rest. We become addicted to replaying other people's crises, checking the stability of their lives as if our constant internal friction could somehow shore up their soft foundations. But the great, steadying insight of this tradition reminds us that no life stays fixed in a single, predictable form, and that our desperate attempt to anchor our security to a permanent, unroofed state of perfection is what exhausts the soul. People and their plans are fluid, they change, they stumble, and they must occasionally face the elements on their own unhurried timeline. When we bring a soft, non-judgmental awareness to our boundary fatigue, we are not trying to erase our deep love for those around us. We are simply learning how to observe the dry heat across our skull, without immediately climbing the ladder to grab another tile. We learn to notice the impulse to fix, to rescue, to apologize for things outside our jurisdiction, and we let that impulse exist as a passing mountain breeze that doesn't have the power to break our spine. Letting go, when understood through this spacious perspective, is never an act of lonely abandonment or cold neglect. It is simply the profound choice to step down from the rungs of other people's emergencies and allow your spirit to sit completely open to the vast, currentless reality of the present moment. It is the realization that you do not need to solve the whole trajectory of their collapse tonight to be worthy of a deep, restoring rest right now. Your physical body does not require an immaculate record of constant, successful rescue missions to possess its own native integrity. It merely needs to stop overloading its own rafters with weight it was never tailored to carry. This empty, open sky that reveals itself through the gaps in the wood is like the boundless space that surrounds the high cliff face, providing a quiet, neutral baseline where everything is permitted to find its own natural balance without any interference from your intellect. The sky does not demand that you fix the cedar beams before it offers its cold, clearing wind. It does not require you to build a flawless shelter before it allows you to look up into the expanse. It simply surrounds your existence with an immense, silent patience, allowing the broken pieces of clay to slide away so that the light can finally show through the cracks. When you allow your awareness to drop into this protective openness, you begin to experience a genuine, self-contained compassion. This compassion is the quiet capacity to hold other people's storms without letting them dictate the temperature of your own skin. It is the internal safety that allows you to look at your tired, defensive shoulders, and recognize that you are allowed to leave the roof bare tonight. Slowly, this ancient medicine becomes remarkably intimate as you lie here in the complete privacy of the dark. You begin to see that the cold mountain wind rattling the distant pines is not an accusation of your failure, but a sacred, unmonitored perimeter that has been drawn around your bed to let your upper torso expand in peace. The world outside is still holding its own weight, entirely unbothered by the fact that you have chosen to step down from the ladder of active repair for the next few hours. Your true nature is already whole, already deep, and already resting in its own unroofed sanctuary, completely independent of whether you manage to shore up the family workshop or fix the lowland debts before the sun rises. In a moment, our journey will take us down to a gentle inner practice, letting the natural drop of your breath release the heavy tiles from your frame. But for now, let the exhausting need for structural perfection dissolve into the dry cedar oil of the room. Knowing that your empty space is enough to hold the quiet, if it feels right, allow your attention to focus inward, mapping out the immediate physical architecture of your upper body, observing the quiet grid where your spine rests against the supportive frame of the bed. There is no need to manipulate your breath with any kind of forced precision or rigid counting. Perhaps you might simply observe the natural, cool expansion of your rib cage as the air enters, and the unprompted heavy drop of your belly as the breath leaves your body. With each slow, quiet exhalation, you might invite the sharp, dry, prickling sensation directly across the outer edges of your shoulder blades, and along the slender lines of your neck to lose its tight, defensive edge. You are not trying to attain a profound state of spiritual enlightenment, nor are you required to demonstrate perfect meditative composure before the sun rises. Even noticing the subtle warmth of your own collarbones as they respond to the room is entirely enough to begin sealing out the external noise. Right now, you might choose to bring your internal awareness to that rapid, checking sensation that has been humming steadily behind your skull throughout the day. Do not try to squash it with sheer willpower, and do not treat it as an enemy that must be destroyed before you are permitted to rest. Instead, look at it with a soft, non-judgmental curiosity, the way an old builder might look at a heap of unpolished slate pulled from a deep chest. Notice if there is a specific thought anchored to this physical fluttering, perhaps an image of an unreturned message, a memory of a social encounter where you felt painfully responsible for someone else's mood, or a persistent anxiety about whether you are strong enough to prevent a disaster in your family network. As you observe this thought drifting through your internal sky, you can gently name the emotional pattern without adding any layer of critical commentary to it. You might silently whisper to yourself that this is simply the mind's habit of stacking tiles, the old, terrified conditioning that continuously climbs the ladder rungs, because it is afraid of being blamed for the rain. There is a deep, unhurried freedom in simply recognizing this pattern for what it is, rather than letting it dictate the temperature of your skin. You are merely witnessing a deeply ingrained human reflex, a protective armor that has outlived its purpose for the night. If it feels right, imagine yourself standing by that high limestone ridge we visited earlier, where the thick cedar walls keep out the glare of the world, and the air carries the cool, sharp scent of sun-baked bark. Picture your own internal landscape as that ancient timber structure resting quietly under the force of the mountain gales. See the heavy, mismatched clay tiles stacked high across its rafters, and notice how an anxious, invisible hand has been continuously adding more weight, trying to force a seal against the changing weather of life. Now, instead of using your remaining mental energy to poke or shift the load, you might simply choose to use the natural density of your exhalations as a protective release. Imagine yourself taking those cracked, mismatched tiles of other people's problems off your shoulders, letting them slide down one by one away from your frame. See the heavy pieces of clay glide over the wood, losing their grip and shattering harmlessly on the stone floor far below your feet. There is absolutely no need to force this imagery, and there is no pressure to witness a sudden, dramatic release of all your boundary fears. You can simply watch as the weight drops away, tile by tile, creating a wide, unroofed space within your own chest that is completely open to the expanse. with every slow, unhurried breath that leaves your frame. Picture the image changing as the bare cedar beams settle into total clarity. The space within the structure becomes completely still, no longer agitated by the weight of a patch or the structural panic of a collapsing plan. It is resting in its own protective emptiness, far below the level where obligations, debts, and external metrics have any meaning at all. The blue sky visible through the cracks does not require an explanation for its color. It does not demand a performance before it offers its cold, clearing wind. It simply provides the quiet openness where your true nature can fix its shade on its own unhurried timeline. Perhaps you can feel a subtle change in your body as you allow your protective presence to become completely invisible to the world for the next few hours. The skin across your forehead and the small muscles around your eyes are no longer performing for an audience. They are letting go of the public mask, going entirely slack and soft in the deep privacy of your room. There is no longer an urgent need to guarantee that you can shelter everyone or to fix a single relationship before the morning arrives. You can return to this open, unmonitored baseline whenever you are ready, knowing that your inner world is fully permitted to grow its true strength in the open, far away from human eyes. What happens within your nervous system when you stop treating the chaos of others as an emergency that needs to be answered by your thoughts? Could it be that the security you have been searching for is not hidden in the next rescue mission or the next nod of approval, but is quietly breathing right here beneath the bare rafter lines you have finally chosen to let rest? Let your awareness drop into the cool, deep limestone of this internal vault, allowing any remaining thoughts of vulnerability to float harmlessly across your mind, like loose dust settling on a stone bench. In a moment, our journey will take us to an isolated courtyard near the old stone kilns, where the nature of this trust reveals a deeper, more permanent transformation. But for now, let your breath continue its quiet, open rhythm, fully protected by the darkness of the night. Further down the mountain slopes, where the dense cedar forests dissolved into a sunken valley, the air smelled deeply of wet ash, scorched earth, and the dry, chalky powder of ground stone. Here sat a sunken courtyard behind an old stone kiln, a low-lying enclosure surrounded by high granite retaining walls that completely blocked out the view of the valley roads. This was a quiet, forgotten repository where overfired, twisted, and rejected clay tiles were piled in massive, unstable mounds that had accumulated over several decades. The only movement in this gray clearing was the slow, deliberate work of an elderly monk named Bankei, who spent his days sorting these broken slate shards by size and color, transferring them from one pile to another, without ever using them to build a single wall or patch a single structure. His face was deeply lined by the heat of the ovens, and he carried himself with an unbothered, spacious weight, his breathing smooth and silent. Working within this dusty yard for the season was Tokusan, whose sharp, dry prickling across his shoulder blades had not fully vanished, but had turned into a low, chronic hum of protective anxiety. Although he had left the high ridge hut, his mind remained fiercely bound to the fate of his family's lowland weavers. The emotional challenge deepened when a messenger arrived from the village, bringing news that his younger sisters, despite his exhaustive financial plans, had allowed the remaining silk looms to be ruined by a localized river flood because they had failed to clear the drainage channels in time. The news hit Tokusan like a physical blow, sending a wave of hot, suffocating panic straight to the base of his skull. His immediate habit was to pack his traveling sack, run down the mountain path, and take absolute control of their lives once again, believing that his absence was a dangerous negligence that would destroy them all. He stood in the center of the sunken courtyard, his fingers white with tension as he gripped a heavy wooden mallet with a fractured head, a tool he had been using to break down the largest pieces of unusable slate. His thoughts began to spin an elaborate narrative of personal ruin, declaring that his family was entirely incapable of survival without his constant intervention, and that he was condemned to spend his entire life climbing up the ladders of their structural failures. He felt an intense, burning impulse to scream at the messenger, to curse the river, and to blame himself for ever leaving the lowland workshop unattended. He was trapped in the old mechanism of structural panic, his heart pounding against his ribs as he prepared to run back into the chaos. Elder Banki did not offer a word of comfort, nor did he try to minimize the reality of the flooded looms. Instead, he walked slowly to the center of the yard, picked up a large, heavily cracked ridgepole tile that had been warped by the intense heat of the kiln, and laid it flat across an empty stone plinth directly between them. The old man reached into his sleeve, produced a small, smooth riverstone, and placed it gently in the center of the warped tile. He did not hit the clay or attempt to smooth out its uneven edges. He simply sat down on the dusty ground, resting his calloused hands on his knees, and took a single, deliberate breath, letting his shoulders drop down completely before he spoke. In his low, dry voice, Banki explained that when a clay piece leaves the fire warped and twisted, a caretaker cannot make it straight by hitting it with a heavy wooden mallet. The force only shatters the material into useless dust. He pointed to the cracked ridgitile and told Tokusen that his sister's lives, like the warped clay, had their own internal shape, their own specific momentum, and their own relationship with the elements. He explained that by continuously running down the mountain to patch their mistakes, Tokusen was not offering them shelter. He was merely overloading his own frame with a weight that did not belong to him, preventing them from ever discovering how to build their own drainage channels. He asked the young man if he would spend the rest of his years acting as a temporary roof for people who were naturally meant to stand in the rain until they learned to build their own walls. Standing in the gray light of the kiln yard, with the smell of wet ash thick in his throat, a sudden, quiet realization cut through Tokusen's frantic internal repairs manual. He looked down at the fractured head of the mallet in his hand, then at the warped, unfixable tile resting on the plinth, and he stopped resisting the reality of the flood. He recognized that his family's struggles were a part of their own unmapped path, a clean, unpreventable pain that he could neither control nor cure through his own exhaustion. He took a slow, deep breath, matching the unhurried cadence of the old monk's posture, and as the air left his lungs, he laid the heavy wooden mallet down on the stone plinth, returning the tool he had clung to so fiercely. He did not pretend that the ruined looms did not hurt, nor did he magically stop caring about his sister's future. The flood was real, and the economic uncertainty was still waiting for them in the lowlands. But in that single act of discipline, he stopped treating his anxious, controlling thoughts as an absolute truth. He chose to remain in the sunken courtyard, sitting quietly on the stone ledge with the uncertainty of their survival, refusing to overload his shoulders with a rescue mission born out of fear. He reached out with his right hand, picked up a small, broken piece of gray slate from the pile, and placed it neatly beside Banki's, a simple, compassionate action that did nothing to fix the village flood, but everything to honor the quiet space he was actually inhabiting. This was the subtle transformation in his relationship with suffering. He was no longer trying to act as the load-bearing pillar. For everyone he loved, he was allowing the roof to remain completely open, letting the elements fall where they must without using his own nervous system as a shield. As he sat beside the elderly monk in the deep privacy of the kiln yard, the dry heat across his skull began to cool, replaced by a spacious, unroofed peace that required no boundaries or justifications to hold its ground. In a moment, this quiet shift will take us deeper into the psychological mechanisms of your own evening thoughts, showing you how to lay down the hammer for good. But for now, let yourself rest within that stone-paved yard, knowing that you do not need to fix the world to be permitted to sit still tonight. When we look directly into the hidden machinery of our evening restlessness, we can see that our deepest torment does not emerge from our circumstances, but from the invisible architecture of our internal defenses. We operate under the continuous, exhausting illusion that if we just analyze our environment with enough vigilance, we can somehow force reality into a shape that feels permanently safe. We live in a state of quiet, chronic resistance to whatever is unfinished, unpredictable, or unresolved within our lives. We replay old conversations to see where we lost ground. We rehearse future crises to ensure we will not be humiliated, and we demand that our social networks provide an endless supply of reassurances to prove that we still belong. This constant need for external approval turns our inner world into a busy public square, a crowded marketplace where we are always presenting our rawest vulnerabilities for evaluation. We begin to use self-judgment as a severe, misguided tool for self-preservation, believing that if we punish ourselves with enough internal criticism, we can somehow prevent others from rejecting us first. Over time, this nervous alertness becomes so familiar that we begin to mistake it for our actual identity. We weave our old rejections, our missed connections, and our public embarrassments into a heavy cloak of personal shame. And then we wonder why our upper chest feels like packed earth when the daylight fades. We become terrified of letting the roofline remain open, because we are afraid that if we stop monitoring the structure, there will be nothing left of us at all. But the timeless inheritance of Buddhist wisdom points toward a profoundly different way of relating to this internal noise. The core of this understanding rests upon a simple, vital distinction between what is called the first pain and the second pain. The first pain is merely the unpreventable weather of being a human being alive in an unmapped world. It is the flat, indifferent comment of an official. It is the natural silence that grows between friends. During a busy season, it is the blunt reality that a river will occasionally rise and flood the lower valleys. This first pain is entirely neutral, an unavoidable crossroad that carries no personal malice toward your name. It is simply the cold mountain wind being the mountain wind, blowing across the limestone ridge without checking if your skin is warm enough. The second pain, however, is the heavy, suffocating layer of suffering that the mind manually adds to that initial wound. The second pain is the long internal court case that insists a sudden setback is proof of your permanent failure, or that a family crisis means you are entirely invisible to the world. It is the frantic habit of pulling your rawest feelings out into the harsh daylight, poking them with explanations, and demanding that the world validate your shape before you are allowed to sleep. This second pain is the heavy bundle of mismatched terracotta tiles that you voluntarily carry up the ladder, trapping your spirit in a cage of secondary definitions. We cannot always prevent the first pain, because we cannot command another human being to change or force our past choices to rewrite themselves. But we can absolutely learn to stop feeding the second pain. Peace, when understood through this subterranean wisdom, is never the magical elimination of all your uncertainties, nor is it a state of frozen perfection where no one ever misjudges your character again. True peace is simply a completely transformed relationship with those difficulties. It is the capacity to let an uncompleted plan rest on the table without using your thoughts to slice it into pieces. It is the quiet willingness to sit on the stone bench of the present moment, right in the middle of an ambiguous silence, without allowing your mind to spin an elaborate narrative of ruin. It is the realization that your true nature does not require an audience to fix its color, because it is already securely anchored by its own heavy volume deep within the earth. When you stop treating every anxious thought as an absolute truth, you begin to see that your actual, unmonitored existence is already fully approved by the silence that surrounds your bed tonight. You do not need to win the argument of validation before the sun rises, nor do you need to correct the perceptions of those who are blind to your depth. You can let the heavy wooden mallet drop from your hands, allowing the broken slate to rest undisturbed, and allowing the liquid of your awareness to cool naturally in the dark. Your worth has never been a currency to be bartered in the marketplace of human opinion. It is an innate, uncarved presence that remains completely untouched by whether anyone else notices your value tonight. Slowly, the rapid, hollow fluttering behind your ears begins to lose its electric momentum as this understanding sinks into your body. You see that you have merely been running an exhausted mechanism, trying to perform for a court that was never real. Tonight, you can leave that ledger of social metrics outside the heavy door of your room, allowing your awareness to expand until it matches the silent, unroofed depth of the limestone vault. In a moment, we will explore how to carry this protective openness into the specific, modern interactions of your waking hours, showing you how to live in a loud world without leaving your heart exposed to its friction. But for now, let your breath continue its quiet, opening rhythm, fully protected by the darkness of the night. Now, let this unroofed perspective step directly into the small, fragmented settings of your modern daily life. The wisdom of the open rafters and the abandoned mallet is not an abstract philosophy meant to remain locked in a hidden mountain kiln yard. It is a practical shield that you carry into the exact moments when your day feels most frantic and exposed. It is practiced when you find yourself staring at an unmoving screen, waiting for a text response that does not arrive, and letting that silent glass interface determine whether your lower body is permitted to unlock its tension. It is practiced when you are lying awake at night, replaying a minor conversational misstep from 3 months ago, or attempting to control the fluid, changing dynamics of a relationship that has drifted despite your best intentions to keep it anchored. We live in an era that mimics a dry, uninsulated courtyard, a fast-moving space where we are constantly encouraged to display our personal progress, our social commitments, and our continuous availability for evaluation. You look at the visible, highly curated paths of those around you, and a sudden, cold knot whispers that you are lagging far behind, that you have mismanaged your time, and that your ordinary presence is somehow not enough to guarantee your safety. Out of a habit of survival, you might find yourself smiling broadly while carrying an immense heavy sorrow behind your eyes, pretending to be perfectly okay for the benefit of friends or family, and then bringing that exhausting, rigid mask into your bed. You want nothing more than to drop the burden and rest. Yet, the moment you try to settle, a persistent layer of guilt tells you that your quiet stillness is an unearned luxury, a lazy abandonment of your duties that will only cause the distance to grow wider. But the great, steadying relief of this ancient lineage is the realization that peace is never a public trophy you achieve by forcing every connection to look perfect. It is a quality of unmonitored depth you bring to these exact, ordinary seconds. It is the simple understanding that peace is practiced in small moments when no one is watching the state of your chords. It is the brave choice to take a single, slow breath before answering an aggressive notification or reacting to a cold silence, allowing your hamstrings to soften before you pick up the iron hammer of self-reproach. This deliberate pause is a profound form of wisdom, an intentional act of unhooking the bucket from the dry chain of your anxieties and letting it drop cleanly into the dark underground reservoir. Within this quiet sanctuary, you can begin to recognize that not every self-critical thought that crosses your mind deserves your absolute obedience, and not every fluttering feeling of guilt is a command that requires your immediate action. When your thoughts begin to spin an elaborate narrative about permanent exile or broken bonds, you can simply observe that movement as a drift of loose dust passing over a cold stone cistern. You do not have to yank the rope with bleeding palms. To fix the blockage, you can care deeply about the people you love without gripping the line so tightly that it splits your remaining strength. By refusing to treat your regrets as an active emergency, the frantic internal court case naturally runs out of fuel, allowing the fibers of your heart to expand naturally in the damp silence. You are fully permitted to rest tonight, without earning it through a perfect performance or a guaranteed solution to your distance. Your value as a living form is already completely established by the simple, quiet fact that you are breathing here in the dark, an uncarved presence that requires no external nod of approval to hold its place in the world. You do not need to possess an immaculate record of constant communication, a flawless history of showing up, or a life that looks perfectly aligned under the glare of public evaluation. The path your feet have actually trodden with all its unread letters, busy seasons, and silent gaps is the only ground that can safely hold your weight tonight. As you allow these reflections to settle quietly into your chest, the internal pressure to fix your whole life before morning begins to drain out through the open spaces of your awareness. The dry, tight constriction behind your knees is no longer a command to be managed. It is simply a tired muscle that is finally being allowed to submerge in the deep privacy of the night. You can leave the digital marketplace outside the heavy door of your room, recognizing that the distance between you and the world can exist without your active supervision for the next few hours. In a moment, our journey will reach its final, deep shaft, where all the remaining noise of the courtyard dissolves completely into a cool, currentless rest. For now, Let your physical body become heavy and full, fully protected by the absolute stillness of the dark. The busy marketplace of your daytime worries has completely cleared its stalls, leaving behind a vast, cool perimeter of absolute stillness that expands to fill every corner of your room. The long, intricate arguments of the mind, the persistent anxieties of your boundary exhaustion, and the restless urge to fix other people's lives have fully spent their electric momentum, dissolving into the quiet, dark space like dry clay dust settling over an empty kiln yard. There is no longer a heavy wooden mallet to swing, no fractured head to manage, and no slipping rafter rope that needs to be frantically pulled against your own strength. The entire architecture of your old worries is gently uncoupling itself from your awareness, leaving nothing behind but the slow, unhurried rhythm of a physical form resting securely in the horizontal dark. Let your body become completely heavy now, sinking down through the supportive layers beneath your spine, as if you were an ancient stone foundation, settling into the cold, deep roots of the mountain cliff. The small muscles around your neck, the delicate hinges of your jaw, and the wide spaces across your shoulder blades are all receiving a total, unconditional permission to go entirely slack. Your breath has become remarkably quiet, a soft, effortless movement of air that requires no guidance, no monitoring, and no conscious intervention from your thoughts. The air simply arrives, fills the empty spaces of your chest, and then glides away into the darkness, carrying the remaining grain of tomorrow's panic along with it. You are completely allowed to stop solving your life for the next few hours. The unreturned messages, the collapsing plans, and the incomplete ledges of rescue can all rest quietly in their dark yards without your supervision. The sky above your head does not require you to act as an unyielding roof to hold its place. It moves by its own ancient, organic intelligence, fully capable of sustaining the elements while you sleep. You have returned to the native sanctuary of your own unroofed presence, a spacious, self-contained home that has never been compromised by the changing demands of human codependency. Listen to the absolute silence that is growing between the slow movements of your breath. The dry gaps of old self-judgment are swelling shut through the quiet openness of your chest, leaving the inner channels wide, open, and clear. You do not need to be anything other than what you are right now. A quiet awareness resting in a dark room, completely free from the obligation to perform, to shelter, or to justify your choices to the coming dawn. The day is fully resolved, the rafters are bare, the stone is still, and you are unconditionally permitted to drop the final tiles from your spirit. Let yourself slide effortlessly into the deep, unbroken stillness of a dreamless sleep, allowing your awareness to dissolve entirely into the dark, comforting expanse of the open sky. What if the only structure you were ever truly meant to preserve was the empty space within your own chest that allows the night wind to pass through without a single fight? The vast expanse of the open sky holds you completely now, a cool and silent vault that has no memory of the heavy tiles you used to carry, nor any anxiety for the storms that may pass across the valley tomorrow. It simply surrounds your weight, whispering through the bare cedar rafter lines that the depth of your stillness is already enough, that the simple act of stepping down from the ladder contains all the dignity your spirit has ever sought. The unroofed timber structure does not need to justify its position to the mountain. It does not need to prove to the wind or the rain that it once sheltered a magnificent treasure within its walls. It rests securely in its raw, unpolished nature, completely saturated by the actual stillness of the night, and in that total openness it finds a heavy, unshakable peace that no external chaos can ever disrupt. Perhaps you can feel your own mind adopting that same deep, spacious quality as you lie here in the darkness. The thoughts that were once so loud, the urgent voices demanding that you fix your environment or protect everyone you love from their own choices, are beginning to lose their sharp, distinct outlines. They are softening into the background noise of the night, becoming nothing more than the distant occasional clink of loose gravel, settling at the absolute bottom of a dry cliff face. You do not need to push those thoughts away, and you do not need to follow them into the dark corridors of old anxieties. You can simply let them drift across the wide expanse of your awareness, watching them appear and dissolve without ever letting them alter the steady, horizontal posture of your rest. This is the deeper training of the heart, the quiet, daily discipline of allowing yourself to be precisely where your spine touches the bed. It is the realization that your true nature has never been defined by the external metrics of usefulness, nor has it ever been broken by the sudden detours or structural failures that life has forced you to witness. The imagined blueprint of your responsibilities was only a map drawn by a mind that could not see the vastness of the whole mountain range. It was a small, rigid design that tried to contain a life that is naturally meant to turn, widen, and change its shape as it finds its path. By letting that map slip out of your hands, you are not losing your way. You are finally allowing yourself to arrive at the only destination that has ever mattered: the absolute safety of your own quiet chest. Let the rhythmic movement of your breathing expand until it feels as wide as the entire limestone ridge at midnight. Each inhalation is a gentle, cool wave of presence entering your frame, filling the spaces where tension used to live. And each exhalation is a deep, quiet release, a natural opening of the wood that allows you to sit lower and more securely in the dark. There is no effort in this movement, no striving to achieve a perfect state of meditation, and no pressure to heal your entire environment before the sun rises. You are simply existing as a living form in a quiet room, fully supported by the flat ground beneath you, and fully embraced by the immense, non-judgmental mercy of the night. The dry sand of your old expectations has washed clean through the open slats of your mind, leaving the internal channels wide, open, and clear. The machinery of your thoughts has finally gone silent, its heavy wheels resting peacefully in the dark shallows, no longer burdened by the weight of accumulated responsibility. You are an open channel now, a beautiful, unadorned structure through which the quiet energy of the world can move without any friction or resistance. You do not need to hold on to your vigilance to protect your value, nor do you need to use shame as a weapon against your own tired spirit. You can let the whole day go, recognizing that you are safe enough to drop your final defenses and slide effortlessly into the deep, dark expanse of rest. As the silence deepens around your bed, feel the heavy, warm comfort of your body becoming completely integrated with the horizontal piece of the room. The boundaries of your exposure are melting into the cool air, leaving only a weightless, unburdened presence that requires no justification to exist. You are home in the only sanctuary that has ever been real, resting quietly under the bare beams where the fresh air of your life naturally merges with the boundless peace of the night. There is nothing left to steer, nothing left to calculate, and absolutely nothing left to solve. Let yourself drift away into the heavy rhythmic peace of your body, sliding effortlessly into the deep, dark expanse of a dreamless and unbroken sleep, fully trusting the open sky to cradle you exactly as you are. The open sky remains unmoving, cradling your awareness in an absolute, dark stillness that knows nothing of the frantic deadlines or the busy expectations of the world below. It is a presence that does not keep a tally of the days spent in structural panic, nor does it demand that the bare timber explain its cracks before offering its soothing, continuous breeze. It simply surrounds the frame with an immense, non-judgmental weight, isolating your spirit from the harsh drafts of public evaluation and allowing the inner grain to expand on its own unhurried, natural timeline. Within this subterranean peace, your awareness is no longer an instrument to be bartered in a crowded market. It has returned to its own native anonymity, resting quietly in a center that requires no validation from human eyes to remain perfectly solid and secure. Let your mind adopt that same deep, uncalculated stillness as you lie completely relaxed in the coolness of the evening. The faint, lingering echoes of the day's tasks, the subtle thoughts that whisper that you are lagging behind, or that your life is somehow insufficient compared to the visible progress of those around you, are losing their electric momentum. They are becoming soft, fluid, and increasingly distant, like the quiet trickle of mountain water passing through the high stone crevices of a wall that is completely sealed away from the room you are resting in. You do not need to fight against those old habits of comparison, and you do not need to enter the courtroom of your thoughts to defend your path. You can simply allow them to exist as small, passing shadows that cannot reach the quiet core of your chest, watching them slide away into the limestone until nothing remains but the slow, heavy rise and fall of your breath. This is the gentle reclamation of your own inner territory, the willingness to drop the public persona at the edge of the bed and let yourself become completely invisible for the night. It is the realization that your true nature has never been a performance to be edited, a reputation to be secured, or an identity that depends on the shifting approval of a social network. The grand expectations you carried through the waking hours were merely a thin paper shield built by a mind that was terrified of being left out in the cold, an exhausting armor that mistook continuous availability for genuine security. By letting that armor drop completely into the dark tonight, you are not abandoning your life. You are finally allowing your nervous system to return to the only sanctuary that has ever been real, the unmonitored space of your own breathing body. With every quiet, unhurried breath that enters and leaves your frame, picture the image of the bare cedar beams settling deeper into the protective obscurity of the earth. The space within the clay is no longer agitated by the glare of an oil lamp or the curious probe of a wooden paddle. It is resting in its own self-contained sanctuary, far below the level where public titles, social standing, or digital metrics have any meaning at all. The dark limestone walls do not require an explanation for your silence. They do not demand a performance before they offer their heavy, stabilizing weight. They simply provide the quiet vault where your true nature can fix its shade on its own natural timeline. Completely independent of whether anyone else looks down into the dark tonight, the machinery of your overthinking mind has finally run out of momentum. Its heavy wooden covers sealed tight by the gray clay of a soft, non-judgmental awareness, completely empty of the historical silt that made your chest feel tight during the day. You are an empty vessel now, a simple, unadorned structure through which the deep night can move without encountering a single point of rigid resistance, comparison, or internal friction. You do not need to carry your past missteps to prove that you are trying. Nor do you need to use shame as an instrument to correct your direction for tomorrow. You can leave the entire marketplace of human evaluation outside the heavy door of your room, recognizing that the world will continue to spin without your active management, and that you are unconditionally permitted to let your mind go completely soft. As the silence deepens around your bed, the warm weight of your physical form becomes entirely integrated with the horizontal peace of the night. The boundaries of your exposure are melting into the cool air, leaving behind nothing but a weightless, unburdened presence that is already safe, already deep, and already home in its own center. There is nothing left to calculate, nothing left to steer, and absolutely nothing left to solve before the morning arrives. Let yourself drift away into the heavy, rhythmic peace of your body, sliding effortlessly into the deep, dark expanse of a dreamless and unbroken sleep, fully trusting the subterranean vault to cradle you exactly as you are. The dark mountain air wraps around the unroofed timber beams in an endless, slow embrace that has no beginning and no destination. It simply remains, a vast and quiet medium that welcomes the cold rain and the bright morning sun with the exact same unmoving composure. It does not ask the structure to rebuild its walls, nor does it demand that you stand watch over the valley to ensure that the river never rises again. It simply offers an immense hollow space where your spirit is permitted to expand to its true uncarved boundaries, far beyond the narrow, suffocating geometry of other people's expectations. Within this silent valley, your nervous system is no longer a tool to be driven into the earth. It has returned to its native ancient rhythm, moving with the deep patience of stone. Let your awareness drop even lower now, past the level of your muscles, past the level of your bones, until it matches the cold granite plinth that sits undisturbed at the center of the kiln yard. The thoughts that once kept you running up the ladder rungs are becoming completely weightless, like tiny flecks of white ash rising from a dead fire and floating harmlessly away into the night sky. You do not need to check their direction, and you do not need to guide them safely to the ground. You can simply watch them drift, noticing how easily the dark swallows their shape, until there is nothing left but the smooth, deep column of your own steady presence. It is the ultimate relief of the unroofed life, the realization that when you stop trying to act as a shield for the world ceases to look like a threat. The problems you have been overthinking are not an emergency that you must personally resolve before you are permitted to exist. They are simply the natural movements of a fluid, changing reality that has its own balance, its own timing, and its own capacity to settle. By leaving the rafter lines bare, you are not failing those who depend on you. You are offering them the greatest gift a human soul can provide, an unshakable, centered space that refuses to join the panic. You are showing them that it is possible to stand in the middle of a storm without ever picking up the hammer of self-reproach. With every quiet, flat exhalation that leaves your chest, feel the heavy, grounding peace of the earth rising up to claim your weight. The skin across your forehead is completely smooth. The small paths around your eyes are soft and open, and the large muscles of your lower back have gone entirely slack against the bed. There is no longer a structure to maintain, no longer a reputation to shore up, and absolutely no requirement for you to prove your usefulness before the daylight returns. You are simply a living form, resting in the deep privacy of the night, fully protected by the absolute stillness that has settled over the mountain. The gray clay of your old anxious habits has completely dried and dissolved into the soil, leaving your inner channels wide, hollow, and perfectly clear. You are an empty valley now, a sacred, unmonitored baseline through which the vast night air can glide, without ever encountering a single point of rigid resistance or internal friction. You can let the entire history of your rescue mission slide away completely, recognizing that your true worth has always been an inherent, uncarved truth that remains completely independent of whether you ever climb the ladder again. Let yourself drift deeper into this heavy, horizontal peace, sliding effortlessly into the dark, comforting expanse of an unbroken, dreamless sleep, fully trusting the open sky to hold you exactly as you are.